Today, we're talking about not just the recent news about OpenAI dropping the prices of O3, which is a big part of today's conversation, but it's actually bigger than that. Today's conversation is more about equity, it's more about equality, it's about what happens actually when we drop these prices. Is that good for everybody, or are there sort of rippling effects? Do we need to perhaps get more governments involved that can help with some of the regulated costs of some of these models? So there's a lot going on here that goes deeper than just do models get cheaper. And so there's a couple of questions here that we want to kind of explore. Does cheaper AI really mean more equal access around the world? Who gets left behind as AI gets cheaper, especially in the developing countries? And are we really solving digital inequality or just making it worse with low cost AI? And so this is the Daily AI Show. Today is Monday, June 16, 2025. I am joined by Andy. I'm Brian. We'll see if anybody else pops in the door this morning. So welcome, first of all, welcome back, Andy. Glad to have you back.
Yeah, nice to be back.
And so this is sort of an interesting conversation or discussion to have, Andy, because on its face, I think the idea that cheaper AI, O3 getting cheaper, let's say ChatGPT comes out tomorrow and slashes their plus model to $10 a month or something like that, sounds great. And for a lot of people like who are in the United States or in more developed countries, that is great. But there's a lot of fear here that I think we can kind of dig into. And I definitely want to get your sort of thoughts on it. But just as a structure here, just so we have something to start from, I looked this up because I was curious myself. I said, compare what a $20 subscription would actually cost in a couple of places around the world. Because we have a good sense of what that costs here. And that's not to say that everybody in the United States, where you and I live, that $20 is equal, right? We know that. But even like, let's just go beyond the United States to other parts of the world. So in India, $20 would be about 1.8% of the median monthly income. In Zambia, 5.8%, Madagascar, 12.8%, Mozambique, 14.5%. And then if you went all the way to the Central African Republic, $20 is about 21.3% of the median monthly income. For comparison, in the United States, $20 is less than 1% of the median monthly income, with it being over 1/5 if you go all the way to Central African Republic. So you say, okay, but hold on a second. If models are just getting cheaper, I mean, that's still good for Central African Republic, right? It still is dropping the cost. Well, this is where I'm really interested to hear some of your thoughts on this, Andy, because I think it'll be a fun discussion. Is there's some bigger issues here. So it could also make the gap worse, like in terms of like access to deeper issues like infrastructure. If we don't go after deeper issues like infrastructure, education, and fair representation, then the model itself just being cheaper, what it could end up doing is, yes, it makes it cheaper and more accessible for people in developing countries, which means that you might have a lot more people in the United States using it. It's now cheaper, which means that it could then enforce more biases and you could have the United States enforcing more control over what those models do, which then may not be in the best interest of some other developing countries. So while prices coming down sounds like this big global, and it is in a lot of ways, in a lot of parts of the world, as we know, just having a solid, stable internet connection is nowhere near something that's going to happen tomorrow because of energy and infrastructure and stuff like that. So anyway, all that to say that this discussion is really just about like what happens when these models get cheaper. And if it's not great for everybody, how do we address that? And I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on it, Andy.
Yeah, I think we have to recognize that we're in a window at the beginning of a market space for tokens and compute that is so competitive, and multiple companies with similar capabilities are all attempting to grab sufficient market share to survive and or take the leading market share, as ChatGPT has, in both in sort of thought space as well as in actual usage. And in that period of time when that is going on, price pressure is significant, and it pushes the cost of these services probably below their actual delivery cost
Yeah.
at this point in time. right? So you have to look at that as an aberration of the ultimate pricing structure. But I think there's some models out there for internet cloud services that suggest where it goes eventually.
Okay.
Um, and I don't mean in terms of price level, but just in terms of price model. And let me talk about what the pricing models are that are going out there right now. There's basically most of them are they have underneath them this token pricing.
Right.
Like they're trying to manage their inference costs and compensate those inference costs with revenue. And what that has emerged at in this particular market is this tiered pricing. So you get a free tier to get people in the door and try to get them to you develop a usage pattern in their own practice. And then you have, a low level, very inexpensive low level, but it's not so inexpensive that everybody in rural America is going to own, a plus account for ChatGPT. So you have these multiple tiers. You got typically, whether it's one of the main frontier models or whether it's one of the AI powered services, you have a free tier, you have a starter tier, let's call it. Like it doesn't cost very much. It gets you a very usage limited, bundle of services that doesn't include a bunch of higher end features. And then you have a plus tier perhaps and a pro tier. And each of those are product bundles. And typically what you're paying for is additional compute access. But there are also other features that are assembled into those bundles, like context window. You can pay for a larger context window by gaining access to a model that has one. And that is very useful, as you've found in the work that you do and the work that I do. Having a larger context window really makes a difference in terms of the continuity of the discussion and the capabilities of what you're working with. Latency is another one. You can have access to the compute, but you might be throttled in terms of how fast the responses can come to you. And if you're trying to build something or you're trying to, pursue something where, time is a factor, having the clock tick slowly is a problem. So you can, access models and or tiers that have more immediate access to inference compute so that your responses come back more immediately. Quality and safety I think are a piece of the bundles that, the O3 model, for example, suggests, that quality and safety may be one of the most important features that we ultimately pay attention to. But, we might be willing to wait longer as we are with O3 to get the higher quality of the reasoning and the reduction of hallucination, just the higher reliability of the responses that are coming through, whereas you can go to a much faster, low latency and less expensive result. But, for the vast majority of users, the quality and the speed and all of that are perfectly sufficient for what they're using AI for at this point in time. So the price gates that are on each of these tiers, and by the way, a couple of other dimensions of those tiers would be tools, like you have access to specific tools that they've built that make things easier.
Which is becoming a big deal right now. Yeah.
Web search is a key one, but now it seems like everybody's bundling web search into it because it's like it's table stakes for responses in AI. And then multimodal capabilities. Many people don't, use images particularly, and it may be that you have to stratify those. Like I'm going to be really perfectly satisfied with just a chat interface with voice, but you're going to be throttled on voice, right? Voice is inherently more expensive than text chat. And so I've actually personally run into, you've used up your advanced voice time, on this. And so I go, well, I guess as much as we're being encouraged to use voice as the primary mode of interaction, it's not going to be that useful to me if in the middle of what I'm trying to talk about, I've reached a limit and have to wait 6 hours or whatever.
Yeah. Which, by the way, I mean, we've all gotten very, very used to the way it is now versus 1 year or so ago when you would have just been throttled in text. So there is this building feature, right? And as you move into multimodal, and I always say, like, this follows the same predictable pattern we've seen through social media for years. And I always talk about back in 2015, I was running Facebook ads. And the only reason I bring that up is because, that was still at a time where you could still basically make some money on Facebook for free. And then the ad system really kind of kicked in a little earlier than that. But my point to it was, like, what did you see first on Facebook? Well, it was back and forth texting, right? It's like I put a post out, I say what I'm doing for the day. You may say something back to me. And then slowly but surely we saw images. And of course, then we see video. And now you have things like TikTok, which is completely video based. And obviously Instagram and others have followed suit. And there's going to be something beyond that. That'll be whatever that is, AI and maybe AR. And there'll be something that takes a much higher compute that you would struggle with latency right now. Maybe it's just 4K video, maybe it's spatial video. I'm not really sure, but that'll be where it goes, right? It'll go to that next thing, and then it'll just be little smatterings of it. Eventually, everybody's 5G networks and their cell phones and all that stuff will be able to handle it, and then it'll become the norm, right? It'll just ratchet up to higher quality video and stuff like that. And of course, we see the same thing on AI, where text to text, right? Text in, text out. And then we're seeing all these other variations in multimodal. And that's just where we are today, which is like text to video or image to video, or, video to video, I guess, in some cases. But that's not where it'll stop. It'll continue to grow and evolve from there. You mentioned the models, Andy. One of the things I think is challenging is when you convert words to tokens, or that's what most of the major models do. But then you also have a lot of players in the space who won't use the term tokens. They'll use something like, what would be the term for it? God, it just went out of my head. Not tokens, but
I'm talking about credits.
Credits. Thank you. Yeah, I was like, starts with a C. Credits, right? And then it's like, well, how do you define it? You have your business, I have my business. How do you define a credit? How do I define a credit? And that's not even across the board either. So it's actually really confusing sometimes to figure out exactly what does something cost. Oftentimes, I know I find in AI, it's like, well, let me do a little bit and then I'll backtrack and see what it costs. But of course, not everybody is in that privileged position. Not to say that I do not feel rich by the standards of living in Florida or the United States, but of course, comparatively to other parts of the world, I would seem very rich, of course. And so, like, I'm able to play in that space a little bit, but I also am very aware that that's a privilege, right? That I'm capable of being able to do that without it directly affecting my family. That's not the case in a lot of other parts of the world, where not only maybe is English not their native language, and so they may be using a tool that was maybe a different language was secondary to the way it was initially built, and that might have impacts on them. But also that idea that, okay, well, there's a certain cost to token. I have to kind of figure out what that means to me. And it's 2 million tokens. I don't know, how many tokens do I use? And so you're trying to figure that out. And for people who, don't have that privilege of being able to wing it and see what happens back and go, okay, that was too much, too little, or whatever.
Yeah, I think you nailed the idea of what structural impediments there are to access in the developing world.
Sure.
And one of them is internet access, right?
Yeah.
Not everybody has a $1,000 smartphone or cell coverage sufficient to actually work with that device. And there are, important governmental initiatives to try to provide access. And in the United States, even there was a push to get broadband access to everybody, even in rural communities. But that's a big, big obstacle. And I think that's going to impair the ability of those people that we want to bring along into the intelligent future, intelligence-powered future. We want to bring them along, but I think it's just going to be very difficult for them. So
yeah. A lot of companies have to decide whether it's going to be a public utility, right? And some governments may decide to go that route and subsidize the cost.
Yeah. Yeah. For example, there's a notion of putting a public compute voucher scheme in place.
Okay.
So that would be a government funded credit like education grants or whatever that gives every citizen baseline AI capacity. But what I was saying at the top of the show is that right now, as long as you have an internet connection, you have access to pretty powerful AI for no cost whatever. And
Sure.
one of our colleagues, not colleagues, but one of our avid listeners, Jude Simmons, has made it his personal mission not to pay for any AI,
Yeah.
and he gets everything done. I mean, there's so many different free, trial offers and
Mhm.
free access tiers with multiple models, and even if they're throttled by usage limits, you can just start here and then move over to the next one, and work your way around. So it is in this moment of time, it's quite universally accessible. And there's an interesting dynamic that's probably going to keep it inexpensive for a long time. And that is the people who have the means to buy edge computing with sufficient GPU in a laptop to run local models will start to do that in preference to paying for the currently subscribed services that they have. Uh,
Sure.
I can imagine that right now, while I'm subscribing to 3 or 4 different services, I might drop that to one
Yeah.
to have access to a cloud-based service, but I'm going to have a really powerful open source model running on my, how can I do that? Well, I've got to buy a Mac Mini,
Right.
that
Yeah.
has sufficient power. So it's not
Today.
a, and
Today. Yeah. Not in the future, obviously. But yeah, I
in the
agree with you
future,
today.
you'll have the same thing on your phone. And this
Yeah.
may be an interesting angle on what Apple's strategy is
Mhm.
they may be saying, look, for the vast population of iPhone users, they don't need advanced AI tools in their iPhone.
Sure.
And what we're going to do is we're going to power those features that people are most likely to use with really competent AI, and it's not going to cost you anything additional. You'll still have to buy an iPhone, uh, and you'll have to have an account with a cellular provider, but you won't have to pay an account a premium to have access to really powerful AI on your phone.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. And I mean, that goes sort of along with what OpenAI has been saying too. Sam Altman has said, like, we're trying to create an AI assistant for the world. Right. And so that's that same idea of it maybe going to an edge device, like you said, down to like the phone level, or maybe whatever the future of what Johnny Ivey and Sam Altman, and it's going to be a pin or a no screen device. People have joked and said we'll be back to the days of the original iPod Nano, I think it was, with just a little square, that didn't have a screen on it, didn't really need to, because in this case you would just voice activate it, or maybe it's got some bone conduction or who knows what. That becomes the preferred, to your point about voice, that's the preferred way of interacting with the AI in and about the world. So it becomes this assistant of, how do I manage my life? How to go through my life? What's going on with my kids and all that? And you're right. Once it gets to a point where it's so highly personalized and it's on somebody's device, do you really care that it's necessarily cloud based if it's connected to the things that matter most to you? Now, is that going to help you when you do need O3 to do research or in your work? Maybe not, and maybe that's not, you won't be able to do that on that device. But if the idea is for Apple or any of them to create essentially this AI assistant that's as unique to you as mine is to me because of what it knows in our personal lives, you're probably right. Like, do I need the leading advanced parts of AI, or whether that's a deep research or an O3 or whatever the prevailing model is at the time? Probably not. And so it's not going to need that latency or that ability to run on an edge device. For most of your day, it's not going to be necessary. Now, Sam Altman also talked about this, and this came out. He said it again in a recent interview that I was watching, but in reaction to when we had the big, what was that, Christmas time, when DeepSeek came out, and I think it was R1, and they're like, we did this for an insanely cheap way, right? And everybody said, well, and it made all the news stories at the time, and whatever, it's settled down since then about how they went about it, whatever. But I don't want to get into that part of it. The point was, they appeared to be doing a lot more with a lot less. And so then there was some reaction in the market about, do we need Stargate? Do we need these massive data centers? Do we like it? Well, China seems to be able to figure it out. Why would we need all these data centers if we can do it for half? there's some new efficiency gains or whatever. And Sam Altman has repeated the same thing, which is the same thing I would think is, he said, if we somehow half the cost, double the people would use AI. And so this idea that you would not need those other data centers is probably wrong, because even if you did find extreme efficiencies, that would probably just open it up to more people to use it for cheaper costs. And of course, then you would need the data centers to take on that
Right.
extreme uptick in usage. And that goes back to the original point too, Andy, about like, is that a double-edged sword? Not for us, not for you and I, but for people around the world who, because of infrastructure, because of internet speeds, because of a lot of reasons, what it does for you and I, perhaps sitting in the United States, is it enables us to speed up. It enables me to create the perfect AI assistant for my daughter going through school, or you for your grandkids, or whatever, right? And it gives us these sort of superpowers that are getting cheaper and cheaper for you and I to use. And we have stable internet connections. We jump on this show 5 days a week. We're all able to talk to each other in high def, and it sometimes messes up, but for the most part, we're very lucky that it's a stable connection, and so on and so forth. And then you go, okay, well, that's what cheaper does for us. We see the benefits of that all the time. But does that mean that we're able just to speed up and widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots? Because if you're still struggling with a decent internet connection, what does it matter if the AI is cheaper? You still don't have access. But now, because of AI and all my AI agents that I've built myself, I'm moving at 7 to 10x speed over other people around the world. How do you ever catch up to that? And does this really cause a big old rippling effect across the world? What do you think on that? Because I do see it. I see how that could be a really big problem.
Yeah, I don't think of it as an emerging or rippling effect. I think it's it's structural already. The conditions are already in place to create a digital divide, right? There are going to be there's a massive space race like thing going on right now for the most advanced users of. Let me talk about nation states now. The most advanced nations that are using AI in a strategic race to maintain parity at least, and hopefully superiority, in order to create both economic and sort of geopolitical strategic advantages. That's at one end of the spectrum, where the billions and billions of dollars are being consumed daily. At the other end of the spectrum, you have the vast majority of the human population not actively engaged with AI. Sure, a lot of people may have tried, to do a chat GPT query once, but even in my household, I'm an outlier in terms of the pace and extensiveness of my use of AI compared to my family members, even though they have daily exposure to it and they know what I do.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah, similar in my house, by the way. Yeah.
yeah.
My wife uses it, but and my daughter is intrigued by it in the ways that it'll help her at age 14. And she'll tell me that she wants to learn more AI so she could become an entrepreneur, and she has a big drive towards that. But yeah, same, right? Like, I think a lot of us would say that.
So despite this, there is a shortage of and an increasing demand for inference capacity, and that's
Yes.
driving the investments in data centers, primarily for inference, and placing them in terms of geography in places where power is not going to be that expensive, and it's also close enough to where the demand is that it's going to be able to service that. So there are not a lot of data centers in Central Africa.
Mhm.
And so that makes it doubly hard to access AI,
Sure.
because you're going to have to navigate, all the way over to the United States or somewhere in Europe, perhaps, to get to the data center that's serving OpenAI or whatever. So what's going to happen when this all falls out, and there are just a few players out there that have, as Google did for many decades, kind of a monopoly power on essential services.
Mhm.
Well, that's where regulators have to come in, I think, and consider compute capacity and access to compute capacity as critical infrastructure for their entire population. And hence, the initiatives to try to make it, equally accessible, no matter where you live and, what level of the socioeconomic strata you happen to inhabit. But eventually, I think that what you're going to see is, a migration slightly away from the sort of tiered bundle pricing, which is trying to introduce new tools, features, and capabilities and access to, people who are intentionally and necessarily using AI to a much higher degree than most people do. And they'll be the ones who should be paying those higher subscriptions. But eventually this will, because of the limitations on compute capacity at present, this will translate into a reflection of what's underlying all that, where you don't have these sort of introductory bundles in effect, but rather it's all based on the underlying inference costs, the token processing. And there's going to be a distribution over the hours of the day when inference demands are higher and when they're lower for a given data center. And that may lead to spot and surge pricing for access to that compute.
Right.
And that's a different model of pricing that we see today.
Sure.
But I remember vaguely, I don't think I ran into it myself, but back when we were starting out in 2023, really, it seems like there were some cases where there would be usage limits, even for paid tiers.
Yeah, of course there was.
Usage limits, and you'd run into that. But you could bump up to another tier, which gave you, in effect, quote, unlimited, unquote, access.
I mean, not even back in the day. This is the way Claude is right now. Claude would routinely, as I was working on this project, Bruno, would like 4 times on a Sunday. If I was really in there vibe coding, 4 times on a Sunday, I would have to stop because it'd say you've reached the limit of your plan. And if you want more, you're going to have to, I think it's called max. You'd have to go up to max. It was a significant jump, nothing I was willing to do. And basically it just said like, come back at 1 p.m. So that's when it'll reset or whatever. It wasn't, I always kind of looked at it as like, it was a kick in the butt to get away from the computer. So I always saw it as a positive. And I thought, yeah, it's like a timer going off and saying, go do 5 squats. It's like, all right, go move, go get away from the computer, So I always took it in stride. But anyway, to your point, like, yes, I would throttle up against those limits. Yeah. I mean,
so eventually it's more convenient for you as a consumer to just be, like not be stopped in your tracks.
Sure.
Which is a large incentive for you to try to stomach the max pricing, but rather, on-demand spot pricing in effect. So if they're needing to throttle the amount of or the number of queries that are coming against their inference engines, then they can bump the price up to try to discourage people, and you'll have a meter on there that says, right now you're running at this level per minute of inference. And that kind of spot and surge pricing will face regulatory obstacles because it's kind of like rideshare price gouging, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, even my Chevy Bolt, which we plug into the garage, the unit on the wall and the app will suggest other times to charge my car because it's cheaper, right? So there's surge pricing even with Duke Energy coming in the house because it's going to be cheaper for me to charge my car overnight than it is during the day when everybody's got all their devices on and stuff like that. And yeah, Uber is exactly who I was thinking about. Well, two reasons Uber. One, like you just said, surge pricing, which is super annoying. If you just were doing it, if you get on there and you realize your trip that you thought was going to be $10 is going to be 25 because everybody's leaving the same spot. My wife and I recently ran into that in Orlando and had to work around it. But also you talked about these models and what they're charging. I don't know for sure, but like, do we know if O3 is like a loss leader for ChatGPT? I mean, the company in general is spending way more than they're making in revenue. Uber was another company that was deficit spending for a really long time in order to get the competitive edge. They would just buy and buy and buy because they had a beat out Lyft and other competitors into the market and make sure they're the main ones. But they were, surviving on VC funding and debt spending and stuff like that. And we see that with OpenAI. So I don't know if you know, Andy, or not, but like, do we know if these models are sort of loss leaders? Is it like, when OpenAI drops the O3 price by 80%, they dropped it. Is that so they can stay directly competitive with the DeepSeeks and Google 2.5 Pros, knowing that they're losing money on that? I don't know if there is. I know I agree with it, but I don't know if it's like a fact.
That's what this early stage of a market is all about, is gaining market share, and hopefully, as Google did, dominating the search space to the degree that they had a monopoly on that, in practical terms. I mean, there were some other alternatives, but I don't know, they probably surpassed at some point 90% of search inquiries,
Sure,
globally,
probably.
that kind of thing. So yeah, none of these companies are pricing these things at what the fully burdened cost of delivery is. So you're getting an incredible deal getting the intelligence of O3 for, $20 a month.
Right. Yeah. Jimmy joined us. Welcome, Jimmy. Glad you're able to join the conversation with me and Andy. So we've talked about a lot up until this point. The larger conversation, and Andy's been giving his great sort of thoughts on it as well, is just the idea of, does cheaper pricing at ChatGPT or OpenAI slashing their O3 model of O3 by 80%. The overarching idea is that, well, cheaper is better, but cheaper doesn't necessarily get distributed evenly, not just even in the United States where all three of us are sitting, but across the world. And so we've just been talking about how it has more to do with infrastructure and having a good enough internet connection, right? Satellite internet connection. Andy was saying like, hey, you're probably not going to put, the new data warehouses and stuff like that in data centers in the middle of South Africa. That's going to cause latency issues and so on and so on and so forth. So that's sort of like, that's not the only thing we've been talking about, but that's sort of just getting you quickly caught up. But do you have, sort of thoughts on this topic about equity, about, pricing structures, and how that sort of ripples out, or how you see it affecting globally, I guess, not just what we see in the United States, but obviously beyond that?
Right. So I'm sure you've talked about, and I think I caught a little bit about what Andy was talking about, like their actual costs, and you were mentioning loss leaders and things like that. Yeah, and I agree. They're probably just doing whatever they can, whatever these plans are that they're doing right now is more for the adoption, right? Let's get the users on board. Let's then we can settle out to what we're gonna do over time and just build upon that. Now, to kind of touch upon two things. Number one is we'll talk about the distribution, right? What we have seen so far when it comes to development of AI and working with foundational AI partners, different regions of the world are sort of putting in their own investments, right? So the US has a huge investment. China has a huge investment. OpenAI has opened offices both in Japan and France. And so they definitely want a presence there. So they may have plans of building their own local data centers. So in terms of latency, like building in South Africa and those kinds of things, I think their solution will be to build their presence in those locations, much like how in the Middle East, the Saudis have led their big investment into AI, and there was recently some news a few weeks ago about making partners with, I believe it was Microsoft and AWS to have data centers built in that region.
Mhm.
So so I think there will be the edge computing cases where they'll be building these data centers across the world to help distribute the load and the requests and those kinds of things and the needs of the immediate area. Now, the other thing you're talking about is equity and that kind of thing. Um, the When OpenAI was first rumored to possibly come out with a tiered structure beyond the flat rate of the initial plan of the $20, the plus, right?
Mhm.
The plus was touted as, oh, you'll get first access to everything. That's
Mhm.
why you're paying us. Okay, cool. That made sense. Then they came out with Teams and Enterprise. Okay, those needs are a little different. Teams cost sort of like the individual, but a little more because you need to build an admin backend and manage
Sure.
that. Okay, that makes sense too. And then Enterprise is okay, that's just a huge scaling issue, right? And you need to make sure you can support SSO and SOC 2 and all these other data privacy and protections systems. Now, it's the pro level that seems everybody is adopting, right? Google has their pro or ultra level and that kind of thing, right? So that definitely seems to be the trend for the foundational AI models or companies. And what I've seen the trend from them is they're now the new plus, right? Those new features go to them. And, I guess on paper, it makes sense. It's like, oh, well, they're paying the most. They should have access first. But then there's also the talk of, well, there's the $2,000 one they mentioned and the $20,000
Yeah,
one
sure.
they mentioned, right? And so is this mean that they're just going to be moving further and further away? If the empowerment and access of the plus level now the the value of it is now moved higher and higher, you're pulling away that empowerment or lowering of the barrier, right, further away from more and more people, right?
But don't you think, though, Jimmy, it's going to be like, yes, we have, just take OpenAI, we have ChatGPT Plus and Pro and Team and Enterprise, but like, wouldn't we see the $2,000 is only because somebody as an individual is going to be like $2,000, and I've said a couple times on the show, like 2,000, 20,000. There's a market for that. There is. I don't know
Oh
who it is.
yeah,
It's not me.
that I'm not arguing about.
Right.
There's definitely a market for sure.
So what'll happen is those tiers will probably now start stacking underneath your bigger headers, right? Individual plans, 20, 80, maybe 100 a month. The 200, maybe that's considered individual. Then Team will have its view. Then Enterprise is going to have, or business, they'll call it, or something like that, will have its view. And then that may be where you see that $20,000, or it's call us for pricing model, as we sometimes see there, which is your needs are so unique and different that there's no sense in us putting this on, slapping a number on a website. You have a custom type solution. But anyway, whatever that is, I think my point was, I think that's what I would see is like, right now we have 3 or 4, but what we could see, and what Andy was saying, I think too earlier, is like, you could see that, plus then you could also see the surge pricing model that comes through. And Andy, I don't want to speak for you. We're talking about how that could run into regulatory issues and things like that.
Yeah, I do see those kinds of things happening because that's the money making advantage, right? But for OpenAI specifically, if they still do have a mission of achieving AI and providing AI for the betterment of humanity, then I think to be more in line with that, one, and this is something they're doing, though, they just announced that it was going to be delayed, that they have their open model, right? Their open weights model that people can use. It'll be released out to the public that in an open source fashion. I don't know the specifics of what licensing they're going to use with it, but so that does exist. But I think a simple step forward would simply be to, and I've said that word too many times in a row, is to allow for a minimal of access to anything that comes out. So, for example, O3 Pro, just give it to every tier once a day.
Yeah,
running it once just so that they can try it, so they can have access to it, and maybe entice them to go up another level or two. There's that, but not allowing these other tiers to even try these models or even have access to them. That's the issue I'm having.
That's not necessarily true, because here's the thing: I only have a Plus account. That doesn't stop me from using O3 Pro. I just have to go to the Playground to do it. I think the difference, Jimmy, is the typical user doesn't know what Playground is. It's not something that, why would they?
But so also the Playground isn't the ChatGPT interface, because there is a difference between using the Playground, which is more like the API access, and within their ChatGPT. Sure. That's all I'm saying. It's like, yes, you can do an API access, and yes, you have to go learn how to do that. And even if it's as simply, we've used Playground. It's really easy to use, but like you said, they don't know. That's not their interface, right? So if so I'm just saying, just put it in the interface that people are going to expect. This is what they signed up for a free account for. Those kinds of things.
I want to just this is a tangential thought to this discussion, but it has to do with what is the principal mode of interaction for users, let's just say confined to the United States of America. And I don't know what the statistics are. This would be a cool, deep research question. But it's predominantly mobile.
You think so?
I don't think there are that many people like us who sit at computer terminals. Most people. Why not? Because
the business world is at a computer.
Not a part of their job. Well, yeah, there's a lot of people in the business world, but they're using they have access to ChatGPT, but it's just one tab, and their primary mode of interaction is Slack, their CRM system. They're using their enterprise platforms, and they're touching on AI, but that dwarfs the number of humans in the US who are just using their mobile phones, right? Because they don't sit at computers. So, we're trying to kind of segment the market here. But the market that we're talking about, the ones that might even consider using the Playground, for example, are people who are business users of technology. And that's a small subset of everybody out there. So the main mode of interaction for AI, let me put it this way: character AI, I'd be very interested to know, for character AI, what portion of their daily active users are on mobile and what portion of their daily active users are on laptops, desktops. Now that might be a little different if it's primarily the gamer market kind of cohort or persona group.
I actually agree with you that even character AI, or especially character AI, is going to be mobile.
Yeah.
Because the demographic of who's using AI are the Gen Z millennials, right? So I agree that mobile is probably the primary interface
for that one.
And my point about that is that mobile is much more difficult to interact with, though voice interaction with mobile is one important way to try to get past that. But I find myself frustrated by trying to do anything on mobile, right, compared to what I can do on a good desktop.
Well, I agree with that. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I see. This is why I like you say that, Andy, and I'm like, man, I don't know. There's definitely days where, like, if not work related, I'm just sitting in the house and I'm like my wife and I are having a conversation. For instance, we're having a conversation about something to do with Airbnb. We're looking at this and we're looking at that. And at some point you go, I've taken this as far as I want to take this on my phone. And now I just want a bigger screen to see this. Like, it's just it's compelling me to get off the couch and move to the desk or a laptop or something like that, where I could just simply consume this over two screens. Cause now I've reached that level. And so for me, I guess a lot of times mobile is like a starting point, and sometimes it's good enough. And sometimes you go, I'm going to opt into having a larger screen. Now, would my daughter do that? Rarely. Now, I'm 47, she's 14, difference in what we're both doing during the day. But to your point, it would take a lot more for her to be like, I cannot do this on my phone. She would just rather just stay and work from that level of it. Maybe her iPad, that would be like the next level. It ain't going past iPad in 90% of the time, despite her having a computer in her room. I mean, she can open up her laptop anytime she wants, but that tends to be reserved for like school and stuff. So I do think it is a good point, and how that affects everybody and whether they have equal access. To your point, maybe part of this conversation, the larger part of this conversation is, are different parts of the world more likely to use this on mobile devices? And if so, are they also at a disadvantage because that's the way they're going to be interacting with it?
Yeah. So imagine if I asked each of you guys to put aside your keyboard and your mouse, right? Which those having access to a keyboard and a mouse is, for me anyway, that's an important enabling step towards using AI. And I also want to have copy and paste from the keyboard, right?
Yeah.
That's an important piece. Imagine that you don't have access to that, or just say you have a keyboard and you have a mouse, but you are a hunt and peck typer.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're working in chat or programming and trying to do that in a hunt and peck way.
Yeah.
You're really hobbled compared to somebody who's a skillful typer and who has, some sense about what the full range of capabilities on a keyboard is.
And if you just want to look at it from the accessibility angle, the most number of computing devices in the world is a mobile phone. That globally, everybody's got a mobile phone, and most of them have some form of smartphone, and so that'll be the primary. And I think we've heard this over. I remember I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was an interview with Bill Gates, and he was asked, "Oh, what's the future of computing?" Right? Mm-hmm. And he was saying it's going to be the mobile device. It's going to be the mobile phone. Everyone's going to have one. Everyone's going to do everything on it. And this was years before even the iPhone came out. And so that has been proven true over the last, at least the last decade or whatnot. So I can see, just by the numbers, we're going to see more and more on the mobile device about how to access. And if it becomes voice command or voice, conversational, that kind of thing, as it grows into that method, just whatever is easier to use through the mobile device, I think that's what we're going to see, that entry point. And so it goes back to reiterating Andy's point of, if that's the kind of interface that you have, we're not going to be doing something like a playground. So let's just give us a one a day. That's all I'm asking.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. And we have seen that, by the way. I mean, like, some of them will be like, you can use this a little bit and then it's going to go away. And as prices come down, I mean, well, we didn't have O3 on the Plus plan till more or less recently. I think we had 04 mini. It's hard to keep up, honestly, even on the show that we talk about all day, when things came out and when you had access to it, but it was limited and you had a few a day or a few a week in some cases. I mean, 4.5, I think initially was 20 a month or something like that. It was some absurd small amount, but that would qualify as, give me just a little so I can use it once a day type of thing. Claude has their thing, Gemini as well. As we sort of like wrap up this conversation, by the way, I did try to look and see if I could get any quick numbers. And Perplexity gave me back a lot of stats here. I'd have to go validate all of them. But essentially, it was saying to the voice assistant part, adoption of mobile devices shows particularly strong penetration, with 97% of mobile users utilizing AI-powered voice assistants. However, awareness gaps persist in certain AI features. Only 25% of consumers are aware of voice-to-text capabilities, and just 7% actively use this technology. Despite this awareness challenge, 65% of smartphone owners across 16 established markets have used at least one application developed with machine learning. That is to say, I would say AI if you wanted to just shorten that from the machine learning side of it. And there's a lot, it came back with a lot of other stats on here. Nothing to me is like jumped off the page as like, oh, wow, because like it was like, yeah, desktop users typically stay longer, have more in-depth conversations. Mobile tends to be one question, one answer. I think this is pretty much what we've heard Sam Altman talk about, the age gap or the generation usage of how, again, my daughter or my dad or me all use a ChatGPT, and in that there's a lot of variance there about how it does it. My daughter would maybe more like a personal assistant. I'm using it as like the new advanced, maybe SEO or something to that point. So anyway, so we can wrap up here. Any last thoughts on this? By the way, we're going to be talking about tangent. Well, no, that's not the word I want. It doesn't matter. On Thursday, a similar topic. Look, it's Monday. I'm doing the best I can. It's on Thursday. I'm jumping to Thursday because Thursday happens to be Juneteenth, which is I don't know if it's a national holiday. My company celebrates it as well as others. I have Juneteenth off, and we thought, hey, that's a great day to talk about bias in AI models. And so it's similar. I think what I was trying to say is it's a jumping off point, even from this conversation today. So that'll be on Thursday. Tomorrow, we're talking all about GenSpark. So that'll be super, super exciting. I think Carl will be leading that one. So I'm excited to see that. Wednesday, Jimmy will have all the news and all the things you care to hear about, all our ideas and stuff. And then Friday, it's just AI for good. So AI, like, what are the things we've done shows like this before? We'd love for you to come into the comments and share your ideas on it. But it's just whatever our group kind of has sought out or found and thought, that's AI for good. That's AI doing really good things. Today, we're sort of talking about not everybody, the haves and have-nots, and how a lot of parts of the world don't have what we have. But there's lots and lots and lots of ways. We've talked about it, science and everywhere else, where AI is just simply helping people do good. And so we'll be celebrating that on Friday. So we have a whole week's worth of shows. But before we do that, any last thoughts on this topic before we wrap things up?
Yeah, free access is going to persist, and it's going to become more capable, especially as open source models keep downward price pressure on the more advanced models by catching up and being virtually equal to the most advanced frontier models that are the most expensive at this point.
And if you want to see more models or the newest models to come out earlier or onto the free tier so that everyone can try it all, make sure that your spending habits and your usage habits match that need, so that the natural progression and choices from the foundational AI companies will give it to you. Just, hey, OpenAI, just one a day. That's all I want. I want to try every model one a day. That's all I need. All
right. Hey, if you want to keep the conversation going, you can always join us in our Slack community. It's free. So come on over there and join it. Lots of the fine folks who are in our live chat are also in the community, and there's always really good conversations going on over there. So not just about the show topics, lots of AI stuff. It's our way of just keeping the conversation going for folks who can't always join us live. So you can join that Slack community by just going to the Daily AI Show community.com. You could also join our free newsletter that goes out. We just passed 1 year of putting out that newsletter about a week ago. That goes out every Sunday. It's also free. It's a different way of consuming information and just sort of seeing some of the topics we talked about on the show from different angles, not necessarily what we said live, but just deeper thoughts, deeper reasonings into like those topics, but also other topics as well that we get into on the newsletter. And if you want to join that or subscribe to that free newsletter, that's the dailyaishow.com. So there you go. There's everything you can do, all the different ways you can join and interact with the Daily AI Show crew. We hope you enjoyed the conversation today. Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks, Andy, both for being here. I am fairly certain when I hit end stream, we will not have any outro music. So, Jimmy, take us out.
Aloha.